I had a little bit of a double take when I saw the system requirements for Hell Is Us, because it says an RTX 4090 for 30 FPS at 4K max settings, and I thought, okay, a lot of games are actually like that at max settings if you're not using DLSS. But it says that's with upscaling enabled. Now, I mean, the game certainly has a lot going on. There's open environments, etc. And also it does appear to be pretty scalable according to the system requirements, so we'll have to take a look. But let's just go ahead and pop in here. So this is the initial thing where I was like 4K 30, RTX 4090, always using upscaling. So that's one thing about this system requirement chart in general that I don't really like. A lot of this I do like, and I'm not even completely opposed to upscaling of some kind being in a system requirements chart, as long as they state at what level. Because if this is with, DLSS quality, that's one thing. If this is DLSS performance, that's a whole other thing. Also, in general, before we start screaming unoptimized, there should be a demo of this available, I think starting on June 2nd, so short, a couple days after I'm posting this video. And I'm really interested in testing it out to see if it's as demanding as these specs indicate at the max settings. But again, when it comes to game optimization, there's a difference between the ultra maximum settings being difficult to run, which I'm not opposed to, as long as the game is playable on very, modest hardware as well and still looks okay while doing that. And so interestingly here, the min specs are all the way down to a GTX 1070 and an RX 5600 XT. Now, do note that's only for 30 FPS at 1080p, again, with upscaling enabled. So how much upscaling? If that's like performance mode upscaling, that's 50% per access, 25% of the actual pixels of 1080p. That's one thing, especially only to hit 30 FPS. But, if that's a little bit less aggressive, quality level upscaling at 1080p doesn't look that awful sometimes. And if it gets older hardware in the game. So we'll have to see what's happening. Now, one thing to note is this game doesn't have a massive install size, 30 gigabytes. That's lower than a lot of games these days. It's looking like it wants 16 gigabytes of RAM. But let's go ahead and dive into this a little bit as well. So minimum settings, 1080p 30 at for a GTX 1070, RX 5600 XT. If I pop up something like the Tech Power Up Relative Performance chart, which I'll link in my video description, this could help you decide if you have a GPU that's not being listed, where does yours stack up? What might you expect? So the 1070, if I set that as the 100% baseline by clicking on it, we can see that the 5600 XT is generally a bit more powerful, but we're talking 15%. And when system requirements charts say a 30 FPS average, they don't really mean 30, it might be 35, it might be 28, it might be 40 even. They generally just mean they verified it's certainly not giving you 60, and it's, in that general ballpark. So these two GPUs aren't super far off from each other, and game by game, sometimes, 15% swing can happen anyway compared to what's typically the case. But if you have something like a 1660 Super, you are right in this ballpark. A 1660 Ti, you're right in this ballpark. Even an ARC A580, notice A580 there, not B580, that would be more powerful. You're in this general ballpark. A GTX 1080 isn't even super far out of this range, an RTX 2060. And as you get more powerful from here, obviously you would expect either better performance or better settings being able to be enabled. So what does it take to jump up to their next listed specs? So the recommended specs for 60 FPS at 1080p high settings, by the way, the min spec was for medium settings. So potentially if you have something worse than the 1070 and 5600 XT here, you could go down to low settings. So there is that. Anyway, if you go up to high settings from medium and also go up to 60 FPS instead of 30 FPS, again, it says upscaling enabled, and we don't know how demanding that, what level of upscaling. They're saying 2080 Ti or 6750 XT. Notice they're specifying the VRAM amounts on these cards, although it's unclear whether that VRAM amount is actually a requirement for these settings or they're just listing how much VRAM the card has. Anyway, so let's see what kind of a jump that is. So from a 1070 up to a 2080 Ti. Now we are talking about doubling the frame rate and increasing the graphics settings. So we would expect at least twice the performance to be required just to double the frame rate. Let's see where we're at with that. And again, you might spot your GPU somewhere in between here, right? We're going between the 1070 and scrolling up till we get to a 2080 Ti. So as we continue to scroll up to a 2080 Ti, notice that is about 200% of the performance. Or in other words, it is about doubling the performance level, which makes sense to go from 30 to 60. We're also going from medium to high. And again, since 60 FPS is kind of a general ballpark and all of that, so is the 30, that this sounds roughly reasonable. The 6750 XT generally a little bit weaker than that. And so you can see that if you're on something like a 2080 Super, you're a bit lower than that. 3060 Ti is a bit lower. You're somewhere in between their minimum and their recommended. Cards like a 3070 Ti would be right around the same performance tier. 3070 is around this performance tier, although again, those are 8GB GPUs, and so it's possible that there could be settings needing to be tweaked to stay within that 8GB VRAM buffer, which might be why they're mentioning a 2080 Ti and a 6750 XT, which both have more VRAM than cards like the 3070 or 3070 Ti. So that'll be something to keep our eye out for if testing actually occurs here. Are you guys interested in me benchmarking this when the demo comes out? If I get enough interest in this video or comments on it, then maybe that'll be worthwhile. Now the high settings are, their high specs are for 1440p 60 FPS, staying at the high settings. So basically we're staying at 60 FPS, staying at high settings, but increasing from 1080p to 1440p. They're saying that you should then jump up to an RTX 3080 or 6800 XT. Notice the 3080, they're listing it's the 10GB version. So it sounds like that would probably have been good for the 1080p high settings as well. So again, maybe 8's an issue there. We're not sure yet, but sounds like 10's probably at least okay. But again, we're talking some amount of upscaling being used here, but it's unclear exactly how much. Now, how much are they asking to go from 1080p to 1440p, and does it sound reasonable? Well, let's go ahead and set the 2080 Ti as the baseline and look at how much more powerful is an RTX 3080. Well, if we go up to the 3080, it's about 34% more powerful. The 6800 XT from AMD is generally right in that same ballpark. They trade blows depending on the game, depending on if ray tracing is enabled, then usually a 3080 pulls further ahead, etc. But these totally make sense to pair up with each other. And again, going from 1080p to 1440p, this makes sense. All right, so then they're saying if you want to move up from the high settings to the very high settings, but staying at 1440p and 60 FPS, that you would then want to be on a card like a 3090 or a 6900 XT. Now, the 3090 is not generally all that much faster than a 3080. It's not like the later generations with the 40 series and 50 series where there's a huge gap between the 80 and 90 class GPUs. In the 30 series, it was actually very close. Same thing with the 6800 XT and the 6900 XT. They're not asking for a huge jump here, although I'm curious on the NVIDIA side, going from 10 gigabytes to VRAM to having more than 10, I doubt you need 24, but having more than 10 can sometimes be necessary these days on kind of near maxed out settings sometimes. So anyway, I'm curious if that's playing into things. So if we set the 3080 as the baseline, let's go ahead and see what more they're asking for here. If we scroll up to a 3090, it's only 16% more performance, but it's a lot more VRAM. So it's possible that is playing into this here. And the 6900 XT, again, a bit weaker than the 3090 usually, but depending on the game, sometimes it can actually be up there. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at what does it take to max this game out at 4K. So notice there is something above the very high settings. There are ultra settings. Not sure what that's doing, but now we're talking 30 FPS at 4K. So we're jumping from 1440p to 4K, but we're also cutting the frame rate in half to 30. And they're saying you need a 4090 or a 7900 XTX. Oh my goodness. So if we were at a 3090 before, if we set that as a baseline, the 4090 is significantly more powerful. The 4090, we're talking 73% more performance here, according to Tech Power Up. So that's a lot, considering that we're still, okay, we're moving up to 4K, so this would make sense to me if we're going like 1440p to 4K and staying at 60 FPS. So whatever they're doing, going from the very high settings to the ultra settings here, sounds like it must be insanely demanding, although the 7900 XTX is less of a step up. So there is that. That's only asking for 33% more performance. So that's kind of interesting. Don't know quite what's going on here, and that makes me kind of want to benchmark this. Whether that's worth the massive time investment usually depends on, are you guys actually interested in this? Which I'll judge partially by the popularity of this video and what the comments in this video say. Because I think the game's not coming out for a while. I'm seeing a release date of September 4th. But I believe there is a demo coming soon. I heard something about a demo on June 2nd. I could be wrong on that. But if that is the case, would you guys want me to check that out? Let me know. The last thing we could mention is that the CPUs here don't seem too crazy. We're looking at for the 30 FPS medium settings, an i7-7700K or Ryzen 3 3300X. For 60 FPS, an 11700K or Ryzen 5 7600. Okay, that's a bigger jump. So actually, I will say the minimum CPU didn't seem crazy. But the 60 FPS CPU, because again, the settings don't usually have a huge impact on CPU. Some things like draw distance and NPC count can. But the frame rate's usually the biggest deal. I wonder if you really do need a Ryzen 7600 to get 60 FPS. That's actually kind of concerning. If I do benchmark this, I'd want to test it out on my 5600X, see if that holds up. Because, yeah. I wonder if the consoles can hit 60 FPS? Because they don't have a Ryzen 5 7600. Interesting. Let me know what you guys think. I'll link my tech power-up thing and then the source here and the trailer and whatnot in the video description. And I hope all of you have an excellent day.